Every once in a while, my mom will drop some random lore on me, and today she told me that someone in her class, when she was about 10 years old, had their entire family murdered in the middle of the night. And so obviously I was super curious. I'm like, Mom, how come you never told me about this? Tell me about what happened. And so what she said was that somebody had went into the house in the middle of the night, cut the phone lines, and killed the entire family. And that's all that she knew, except for Billy. And I thought, oh my God, I need to do some research on this. So I actually found someone who had covered the case, and it's 10 times worse, and it's crazy. The person I got all this information from is called Midwest Monsters, so go watch her. But here's what happened. So originally my mom said that he went there to attack the mom because him and the mom were friends, and him and the mom got into some sort of dispute, so he went there to unalive the mom and then unalive the entire family. But no, that's not even close to what happened. So Alice lived out in the country with her 4 kids. Patty, Susan, Wayne, and Billy. Susan was 16, Patty was 13, Wayne was 12, and Billy was 10 years old. Alice was actually known to be like a super, super hard worker. So her and her husband were divorced, and she didn't want a cent of child support. She went and bought 2 acres of land with her own money, cleared it with her own hands, and built a 2-story house with her own money all by herself so that she could take care of her kids, which I love that. I love that. It's amazing. But Alice was a waitress at a restaurant, and I don't know what restaurant it was. I don't think she ever said. But there's a guy named Joseph Turry Jr. who was literally obsessed with waitresses. Like, when he was caught, he had like tons of notes in his car and in his house on waitresses. Like, it'd have their name, where they worked, when they worked, what kind of car they drove, what their license plate was, what their number was, where their address was. Like, notes. One of the notes even said, "Get this one," and it was circled. So he's a creep. And he actually saw Susan and was like, "I really like you. I want to date you." And she was like, "No, my mom wouldn't like that." And I'm sure she was just like, "No, I actually don't want to." But she was like, "My mom wouldn't like that." So then Joseph was like, "Oh, I'll just go talk to your mom." So he shows up at their house and is like, "Hey, Alice, I'd really like to date your daughter." And she's like, "No, you're creepy. Absolutely not. Stay away." And that pissed him off. So then a little while later, he literally goes to their house in the middle of the night, cuts their phone line. He's wearing a mask, and he's got a metal rod and a gun. And he encounters Alice when he first walks in, and he beats her with the rod and then shoots her. And Patty actually hears what's going on, so she goes downstairs. She's 13, and he says, "Go back to bed." And she's like, "Okay." So she does, because she's scared. So then he goes into Wayne and Billy's room, and Wayne looks up at him and goes, "Who are you?" And then he shoots him. And Billy, obviously, he gets scared, so he takes his hands with his blanket, and he throws the blanket up over his head like that, and he hides, and he's really quiet. And Billy's the only survivor, so Billy's the one telling the story. He says he hears Joseph then go into his sister Patty's room, unalive her, go into Susan's room, unalive her, and then he comes back into Billy's room. And he shoots right at Billy. But Billy's got his hands like this. So he thinks he's shooting at his head, but it misses. It hits right here. And so Billy holds as still as he can, but Joseph hits him or touches him with the barrel of the gun. And Billy tries to stay super still, but it's so cute. It's so sad. Billy says, "I must not have held still enough." And so then Joseph shoots again and misses. And then Billy says, "Well, I must have held still enough this time," because then he left. And so Billy says he waits about 15 minutes. And you got to remember, this is like back in the late 70s, early 80s. And there's no cell phones. And he cut the phone lines. And they're out in the country in the middle of nowhere. So Billy has to run. This is December 15th. So he runs 2 miles in the snow to the closest neighbor to go get help. And I just want to say, I have a 10-year-old. I'm going to cry. What a brave, get out of here. What a brave kid. And all of that is horrible and crazy, but that's not even the craziest part. So the next time we see Joseph, he's creeping on a waitress at like a truck stop. So she calls the police, and the police come and they trespass him and then search his car. And his car has a metal rod, a ski mask, and a Batman toy, a Batmobile. And also notes on all the waitresses, on a ton of different waitresses. And they're like, "This is really weird, but this isn't stuff to like arrest him on." And they hadn't connected the fact that he did this to this family yet. So they let him go. And then a couple years later, he gets arrested and put in jail for 30 years for the R word of some women. And I just want to mention, because I'm watching Midwest Monsters talk about this, and she said that in 1996, when a 48-hour special was aired talking about the Hewling family, and Joseph was on there saying, "No, I didn't do this, I didn't do this," a lot of women recognized him and came forward to the police and said, you know, he R-worded me too. But back then, the police said, get over it. Boys will be boys. Move on. So whatever he did to get 30 years back then, after they told all of those women to move on, must have been really, really bad. So anyways, he's in jail and he starts confessing to other murders, like the murder of Diane Edwards. She was on her way to a volleyball game, and I believe she worked at Perkins, and she drove there. Her car never left. She never showed up to the volleyball game. She never showed up to work the next day. And I think it was like 5 days later, a hunter found a purse. And so he called the police, and the police came, and then a little, not too far away, they found Diane's body, and he had just thrown her in the ditch, completely nude, and threw her clothes next to her. He had done what he needed to do and just tossed her away like garbage. I don't remember what year this happened, but a few years before that, he shows up at this one girl's house who was a waitress. He shows up, attacks her in the basement, R-words her, and hits her in the head with a hatchet. And her mom comes home, Marlace, this is Marlace, her mom comes home from doing errands. Her name was Fran. And I remember that because my grandma's name is Fran and my mom's name is Sue, so it's just crazy. I'm gonna cry. She comes home and she finds her daughter, and she said she looks at her daughter and says, I knew she wasn't gonna make it, but I held her until the police came. So Joseph is literally having his cellmate write these confessions for him, and then he signs it at the bottom. I don't know if he's like illiterate or can't read or can't write or what, but he's having his cellmate write this stuff out for him. And there's stuff in there that is like for example, when he left after what he did to Marlace, he sped away so fast that some gravel flew up and hit an 8-year-old. And that information wasn't released to the public. That wasn't well known. And that was in the confession. And actually, I forgot to tell you this, the only reason he even confessed to Diane's murder at all is because after he was sentenced for all of these R words, he says, hey, I really don't want to go to prison. I really would actually like to go to a mental hospital. So I'll tell you everything that happened with Diane if you just give me a break. And they were like, hey man, no promises, but tell me what you know. And so he spills the beans, tells them everything, and they say, okay, just to make sure that you are 100% take us to where you put her body, so they could be 100% sure that this was this guy. He pointed it out 4 feet away from where she was actually found. And then when he found out that actually he was going to prison, not only for the R words, but for the murder, he's like, actually, it was all a lie. It was all a lie. It was a lie. But no, he was convicted for Diane's murder in the end. But he also confesses to the Hewling murders, right? But guess what they never did? They looked at the confession and were like, well, we don't really have enough evidence. But they didn't talk to Billy. They didn't even ask Billy, because if they would have asked Billy, there was so much stuff in the letter that literally corroborated, like the tan sedan, the fact that Alice was wearing a white dress, the location of the rooms, like all of that stuff was in the confession. If they would have just asked Billy, Billy could have said, yeah, that was him. So they start zeroing in on Joseph for the Hewling murders because he already wrote a confession about it. And a detective that had reopened the case is like, I really want to solve this murder. I really want to solve this for Billy. I want to give him closure. You know, at this point, it had been, I think, 21 years. He was convicted in 1999. So I don't know how long it had been, but it had been quite a long time. Billy had grown up and moved on, and he deserves closure, right? So he's like, I'm going to do what I can to try and solve this. So he really starts zeroing in on Joseph, and he's like, I know that he did this. I have to be able to prove it somehow. So he kind of looks back and he sees that a Batmobile was taken from his car or found in his car back when he was trespassing at that truck stop. And in the confessions, it said something about him taking a Batmobile. So finally, they talk to Billy and they say, hey, do you remember having a Batmobile as a kid? He goes, oh yeah, the one that disappeared the night that my whole entire family was murdered and I've never ever seen it again, that one. And they're like, oh my gosh. It was Joseph. Joseph did this. So then in 1999, Joseph was convicted for the murder of the 4 Hewling family members. And their graves are actually right in my backyard. Like, right in my backyard. I would love to go drop off a bouquet of flowers for them sometime because it just hits so close to home. It's just crazy. Like I said, I have a 10-year-old. Fran, Susan, those are people I know. My mom was 10 years old when Billy experienced the same thing when he was 10. It's just so sad, and I didn't know the extent of it, and it's just crazy, and I hope Billy's doing good now, and I've just never heard of this case until my mom talked about it today. So go watch Midwest Monsters, and she talks a lot more about it, but it's just crazy.